Welcome to Scale Without Chaos, the podcast for growth-focused leaders who are tired of scaling their businesses the hard way. Each week, you'll hear the real stories, the messy parts, the proven strategies that help leaders grow without burning out their team or themselves. And yes, you'll definitely hear a few spicy takes along the way. If you're building something that matters and you're ready for smarter systems, better people ops, and fewer fires to put out, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Scale Without Chaos, and check out our newsletter for insights you won't find anywhere else. And now, this week's episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Scale Without Chaos. Excited to be here today. I have an awesome guest I'm excited to introduce, Josh Kahns of Notice Media. And what really drew me to Josh is the fact that he is working right now through his company, Notice Media, as well as several other companies, to build the modern day PR firm. And we're going to talk a lot today about using your CEO to be your best content generator and to turn that content into revenue and into pipeline. So Josh, if you wouldn't mind, I'll have you introduce yourself and what you do, and then we'll hop right into how we can give some advice to some founders to be able to do exactly what you consult with folks on every day.
Definitely. First and foremost, Samantha, thank you so much for having me. I'm super fired up to be here. To get into my rehearsed 30-second or less intro, my name is Josh, born and raised in Montreal. I took some zigs and zags in my career from when I was 16, taught myself how to code, just because I was fascinated by software and by that space. Went to university, majored in accounting from 17 to 20, and then took another complete 180 from there, where I got into the world of content marketing. Some may or may not call that PR. And what we're building today is the modern day PR firm. So over the past 2 years, we've worked with over 150 B2B teams, helping them power their social content. My main day to day, and what I spend pretty much every waking and sleeping hour of the day thinking and executing on, is social content for founders, particularly on LinkedIn. While we also have a division that does newsletters, a division that does case studies, and a division now that we are helping teams produce animation and motion videos for the product launch, feature updates, and company announcements. All in all these companies form what I like to call the modern day PR firm. And I'm excited to speak about content marketing, and then hopefully share some hot and spicy takes and some actionable tips that may be helpful to whoever's listening to this right now. But thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. We love hot and spicy takes. Those are always great. So bring them on. Sounds good. All right. So what's really interesting to me, and I think what everyone in B2B media has been doing for forever, is just pumping out content, right? Just how can we as an organization create playbooks, create ebooks, whatever that is, webinars that somewhat or may not, even in some cases, relate to our audience, to relate to our ICP, and use that in a demand generation engine. That's been the playbook for years. It's okay, let's have this piece of content, then we'll nurture them through maybe another piece of content or ask them to directly get some type of a demo to convert into becoming a customer, right? So that's something that I think most B2B businesses have down at this point because it's been around for like 10 years, right? The next part, though, which I think is if you're thinking of content as like a pyramid level, that's like the baseline is what I just described. Then you start to kind of go up those levels. And what I would consider to be the top would be the CEO and founder-led content level. So talk to me a little bit about what you see there, why you recommend that, and why it's so important now versus maybe a few years ago.
Samantha, you perfectly brought me into one of my very opinionated takes over here. So first and
Great.
foremost, the goal, I would say, of LinkedIn and ultimately posting content is to build familiarity and trust at scale, right? So one of our best case studies, a client that we've been working with for 16 months right now. They initially came to us. They're not a quote unquote sexy business, let's say. They have a great product, but they're not an enterprise software company. They haven't raised any venture money. They've been around for over 20 years. The founder started out of his car,
Nice.
producing merchandise, and then now they have offices in 2 countries, handful of fulfillment centers, and they work now actively with large companies. They're one of the largest. So they initially came to us and they said, Josh, funny backstory. The founder and myself, we live in the same neighborhood. See him from time to time. My brother and his son are friends. Great guy, role model in the community. And he came to us and said, Josh, I've been seeing your content for the past year on my feed. I love it. We see each other on a once-a-week basis. He kind of makes a comment about LinkedIn. We laugh it off. Then one week I said to him, hey, have you ever considered posting content yourself? He goes, well, why don't you come to my office? Because I kind of considered it. I know that my industry isn't so active on LinkedIn. Again, it's not that enterprise software. We're not looking to raise venture money, but it may be helpful. To where I discovered that he's been building his business by attending trade shows, 5, 6, maybe
Mm-hmm.
7 trade shows a year, and shaking hands. Those handshakes were 6 to 7 figures each per year. And they were the trust generators. You show up and you shake hands, that's building trust, conversing with a person. I told him, consider an alternative approach to it. I said, what if you could shake those hands without actually shaking those hands, without going to those trade shows? What if you could tell those 20-something years in business, tell those stories to the public to ultimately attract the same people that you would be speaking to and attracting at the trade shows by sharing your stories in person? Why don't you do that virtually? And fast forward now, we've been working together again for about 15, 16 months. So
Mm-hmm.
what LinkedIn does is it builds trust at scale. On the other hand, on the flip side, right now there's an influx of teams who are considering posting content. And where do they resort to first? ChatGPT, AI tools, these, software as a service tools that provide, the shortcuts to LinkedIn where you pay $20 a month and you get these, templates that flood your inbox. I would say that the same way you build trust on socials quickly through a post that resonates, so too you could lose it, right? I'll just
Fair
explain
enough.
it like this and kind of paint the picture. If you're to be scrolling
Mm-hmm.
on your feed and you see a post that's bombarded with kind of, as I call, off formatting, emojis that flood the post, hashtag in the wrong places, paragraphs that are either bulky or that are one or two words or phrases each paragraph, it kind of seems and resembles a little gimmicky. And at that point, you may kind of build this perception in your head around the person without even having to speak to them, just by
Right.
reading their content. So I say the same way it's a great tool to leverage and to build trust. So too it is with losing trust. And then lastly, to the pyramid point, before I kind of cut my rant over there, yes, it seems to be that the CEO and the C-suite are at the top of the pyramid, like a hierarchy in a company, right? You have
Mm-hmm.
your employees, middle managers, VPs, and then C-suites, maybe the CEO, maybe sits at top, maybe the board of directors, advisors. But I like to think of it now as maybe a rectangle, if I may. It doesn't really make sense, or even a reverse triangle, a reverse pyramid. Because ultimately, right now, this space is so shifting so quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're kind of used to now CEOs and executives posting on socials. But what about the biggest, most trusted advocates in the company, right? What about the account executive? What about the VP of product? What about an SDR who's interning for a company who just got out of high school, or is finishing up 10th, 11th grade, 12th grade, and they're interning for 3 months at this company? Perhaps you would find it more interesting to read their weekly perspective and their takeaway from the week and what they learned as opposed to the CEO, maybe, right? So what I'm saying here is that we're kind of in an era where anyone can build trust. Of course, there's high leverage, there's a high network. The CEOs obviously have the shortcut because the fact that that they have that credible name. But I wouldn't necessarily discount the employees who, to me, would be the most trusted voice in the company because of the fact that there's no biases, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just another take there on perhaps another way of viewing the pyramid. Yes, it's totally logical to view it as an upright pyramid, but also on the inverse, or a backwards pyramid where, again, or a rectangle, I should say, where kind of everything is equal. And again, a 17-year-old intern has the same power or maybe even more with regards to the audience and
Mhm.
building trust than a, CEO of a 5,000 person company, perhaps.
Mhm. Fair enough. Yeah. So I want to just kind of ask you about a few things that I've seen recently, all on LinkedIn, right? So this is all on that platform. I have a lot of chief growth officers, founders, a lot of C-suite that I follow that follow me back and forth. And for the most part, the majority of what I see these people posting is all news from their company. So it's things like, we're going to be at this trade show. Fair enough. Okay. We hired this person. We did this. But there's no thought leadership. There's nothing that would actually set them apart from the rest of the growth leaders. It's the noise, right? The noise that the company is almost obligated to post, or they feel like they're obligated to post. How would you recommend, if there is a company that's listening right now, they're trying to figure out how to scale, how would you recommend that people start to break that cycle? Because it's a rough one and it's prevalent. It's everywhere.
It's a rough one, it's a stiff one, and it's one that's hard to crack and break into. The
Mhm.
reality is, from the conversations that we have, a lot of these firms, particularly financial firms, more traditional firms, let's say, professional service firms, they're accustomed to getting either a weekly, biweekly, monthly spreadsheet and list of relevant articles that a traditional PR firm would send to them on a weekly basis, saying,
Yes,
"Here are your templatized news posts, which you should be copy pasting and posting, and don't you dare veer off from the script because this is what we prepared for
exactly.
you." Why
Mhm.
don't you consider this perspective? You, an executive who has 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years of experience in a particular space, you are sitting on a treasure chest of gold. You're sitting on treasure. Now, the question is, how do you extract that gold, package it in a format that best kind of narrates your story in public while also remain professional? It's not just enough to talk about yourself, yourself and your personality and your stories. It's not just enough to talk about your business, because then you're kind of like a walking billboard. It's not just enough to talk about your industry, because then you're just sharing industry news. You're not telling anything about your business nor your personal self. So because of that, well, we always suggest founders, and I we had two calls this morning already with founders who asked the exact same question. What's the best balance? How often do I post? What do I post? More importantly, what's the type of content that I post that'll drive impact?
Mhm.
Impact for me is, we want to be able to generate trust at scale, as I said. And that's going to be kind of a recurring phrase, which I mentioned, building trust at scale. So you do that by posting on three pillars: personal themed content, business themed content, and industry themed content. So Samantha,
Mhm.
to put that into practice, what that means is, if I were to ask you to post a personal story as it relates to this podcast, so I would love for you to kind of like give me examples and stories of like, take your experiences as a timeline. Right now, where we are today, today's time, July 11, 2025. Stretch the timeline as far back as relevant, and then recall all the notable things which happened that led up to exactly this conversation that we're having as it relates to this podcast. And then right now, I'm sure your mind is expanding as to all these stories that could possibly be told, and you're starting to remember things you haven't told anyone in 7 years, that you haven't even considered in 36 months. Right? What we're doing is, we're recalling these relevant stories.
Okay.
We're not discussing what you had for dinner last night. We're not doing that. I wouldn't say that that's relevant to this podcast. I don't think, but we're kind of recalling those stories and then packaging them in a way which suits your audience that you're going for through this podcast. That's a personal bucket, right? So with that, we're building familiarity as to how Samantha thinks as an individual and your story, right? And then next is the business pillar, right? So talk about, as it relates to this podcast again, um, just talk about your inspiration behind the podcast. Talk about other podcasts which you draw inspiration from. Talk about the guests which you're bringing on. Talk about, talk about anything that has to relate to the actual business, to the podcast itself, the guests,
Mhm.
your ideal guests. Talk about your favorite questions, right? That way, you give your readers, your listeners, I should say, a good sense as to how how you think of your podcast, of your business. And then lastly, about the industry. So share more about the industry, news, hot takes, trends. What that does is that's the thought leadership component. So ultimately what we're doing is if I were to click on your profile, if I were to follow you, I'm understanding more about your personal story, more about how your business operates, and then more how you think about your industry, which then gives me a sense of familiarity. I know who you are. I know how you think. I know your story. When I shake your hand, when I meet you in person, I know exactly how you like to think. I know how you operate. I know your philosophy behind the work that you do. It builds such a great sense of familiarity, and that ultimately is ultimate trust lever. So
Hmm.
personal themed content, business themed content, and industry themed content are the sweet spots.
Perfect. That I think that's probably the most succinct way that I have ever heard it described. So thanks, Josh. Kudos to you for that. That's excellent. Um, in terms, I know this word is thrown around all the time, and but I don't think that we can talk about trust without also using the word authentic and authenticity, especially when we're talking about having interns post or anyone throughout the org structure of the company. Can you talk a little bit about how to find those authentic posts and honestly, how to make them stand out in a sea of AI content?
So in addition to those three pillars, you know, you may get stuck, right? You look at those three pillars and you say, how do I not embellish a post? How do I kind of
Mhm.
omit the fabrication of a post? How do I keep it authentic? And I'd say really, even if you can't stretch that timeline, as I'd mentioned, even if you can't stretch it as far back as relevant, if you kind of have this block, or if relevant is today, because maybe you just started your business today, and then relevance is in today's time and not yesterday. That's not relevant to what you're doing right now. To find authenticity is to essentially capture moments and capture memories as it relates to today and what you're doing right now, right? So, you know, capturing something authentic to me would be, talking about my experience on this podcast and then how I genuinely felt while recalling it. Maybe I
Mhm.
mentioned something on this podcast that kind of sparked a post in my mind. I'm going to create a post about it while, shouting out the podcast and the amazing things that you're doing. That to me is authentic, right? If I were to make up a story, about some hardship, let's say, we see a lot of not necessarily great stories on socials. If they're fabricated, it's not authentic. Rather, if they
Mm.
come from if they come from real life occurrences and if they sound like you, that to me is authentic. I say the most relevant thing here is yes, you're going to be writing, but if you want it to sound authentic, make it sound like the way you speak. Take real life occurrences and recall them exactly as they happened from your lens, right? So it's a difference of something being two-dimensional versus three-dimensional. And that's like another
Mhm.
segment which I could talk about for maybe 30 seconds with your permission. But
Yeah, please.
two-dimensional, I'd say, is content that kind of just shows, right? Here's what happened. Whereas three-dimensional is when you pick up your phone and you truly read something that allows you to feel something, right?
Mhm.
So instead of just talking about the stressful time where you had to deliver a product on a deadline, that the lesson here is that to always be prepared and that the client comes first because, a deadline's a deadline. Talk about the actual process. Talk about the fact that you looked at your clock. It's 9:26 a.m. on a Friday where you had something due that was, at noon on the same Friday, 2.5 hours later. Talk about the crunch that you had. Talk about the sweat dripping down your forehead. Talk about the internal feelings without embellishing it, of course. But all
Mhm.
that does is it adds dimensions to the post. That way, when you, Samantha, on the other end are reading the post, you actually feel like you're there with me experiencing the same. So,
Mhm.
on one hand, authenticity is recalling something that happened just the way it was in present day time. And then to kind of amplify that and to kind of add sentiment to that is by telling it in a three-dimensional manner as opposed to two-dimensional manner, actually taking the readers with you to kind of share the sentiment with them, I would say, are the two main things in call it authentic content.
Mhm. I love that. That's a really good way to put it. And so as you're talking, I was kind of transported back, speaking of memories, to and I think that this is probably a very common scenario, especially as I primarily spent the majority of my career as the head of marketing, and I interfaced with the C-suite all the time, particularly our CEO, CFO. And I would say the majority of the time, my CEO did not want to be on social media, did not want to be there. Would reshare things because that was what they felt that they needed to do as part of growing the business, but didn't see themselves as a revenue driver. Didn't see their social as a revenue driver at all, and just saw it more as a obligation that they needed to repost when big news was happening for the company. So what would you tell those businesses and those CEOs? And what would your big advice be to get them to think through this and make their just an informed decision about whether or not this really is a good path for them?
I had the exact conversation with the CEO this morning. He was previously he's been leading this company right now in a traditional industry. Again, nothing B2B enterprise SaaS, nothing venture backed, just traditional business that's been around for dozens of years, for nearly a century almost. And he told me the same thing. He said, Josh, LinkedIn is the hottest thing right now. I know LinkedIn has severe and serious impact, and I need to start taking it seriously. And I said, well, tell me more about your story. I mean, you must have a story too. You've been at this company for 1 year as chief executive officer, but I see that you were managing director, managing partner, and CEO at, some other notable companies, 10,000 plus employees over the past 20 years. And tell me more about
Mhm.
that. And then I kind of recall those stories. And then, he had that light bulb moment of, wait, now I'm kind of, remembering and unlocking my career trajectory, and kind of, lending itself to more stories that I haven't told in a while. This could be interesting, he says. And then I kind of stopped him and I said, I just want you to understand, the goal here isn't to become a celebrity. The goal is to be a driver and a business development key for your company,
Mhm.
right? So that's what I say. I say, yes, it's very rare that we come across, a C-suite, chief executive officer, founder, who comes to us and says, I want to be a celebrity. Get me the most amount of followers as possible, get me the most amount of likes as possible. I want to kind of use this as a distraction from my business, God forbid. That never happens. What
Yeah,
usually
good.
happens, no, absolutely not. What usually happens is, um, Josh, I see there's tremendous value here. I have an array of stories, a whole library of them actually, but I just want to be, I just want to keep in mind, and in this consultation, that I don't want to be a celebrity. I have the stories. I don't know how to tell them. I want to be authentic. To me, authenticity isn't posting 5 times a week, because that's just not me. So the thing here, and the thing to remember, is that we're not necessarily optimizing for virality or, for celebrity status. We're optimizing to help share the stories which you already have on your library, taking those books off the shelf, brushing them off, maybe even repackaging them, and then representing them as a story to people who would find it helpful. We're
Mhm.
essentially taking your stories and packaging them as a tool and resources for folks who they could be tools and resources for. That's it. We're all looking to
Mhm.
optimize to be a celebrity. We're looking to optimize to be a vehicle for business development for your company through sharing authentic stories and stories which happen. And we take them off the shelf, brush them off, repackage them, and re-gift them to those who would find them valuable.
Mhm. And in the spirit of virality, you talk a lot about the signals that founders should be listening to, that teams should be listening to, that actually turn into revenue, and what that means for those teams. Can you go into that a little bit for us, especially maybe for the team that right now is chasing impressions and is really frustrated right now with the LinkedIn algorithm and trying to get their posts out there?
It's a great point. I'd say by nature, and we like to align on this with every one of our partners that we work with, every one of our founders that we work with. Our goal isn't virality. Virality will naturally come through a beautifully articulated storytelling post. Posts that drive impact. We, our firm, optimize for ROI. We understand that, yes, this is a brand building activity. It is also, at the end of the day, marketing expense. With that
Mm.
said, what we optimize for is not likes and numbers. We are optimizing for dollar signs. We are optimizing to help share and package your story to the right people who would deem them valuable, right? So with that being said, we need to find signal. And I recently shared a post about, some practical practices and things that teams should do to capture that signal. And I'll just kind of run through a quick activity here. As I often like to say, posting content is not enough, right? Because if I post like a piece of content, even if it resonates, even if it lands me on a great podcast, at the end of the day, I make a post, say it gets 100 likes, fantastic. Maybe 80 of which are from first connections. So people who
Mm-hmm.
I've already had conversations with. Maybe 20 likes comes from people who are second and third connections. And of that 20, maybe 7 of which are people who I strongly believe that we could be great partners to and with.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, what do you do then? And this is where the signal comes to play. On one hand, if one were to want to generate business through LinkedIn, let's say, they could post, they could run their outbound, they could do some comments, kind of tick every box off like a checklist. But to do so intentionally and to actually capture signal is to make a great post which lands and resonates. That's what kind of breaks and builds that trust. Once you see someone who you aren't yet connected to, or even if you're connected to, but you haven't have had the chance to introduce them, use that interaction that they had with your post as signal. Use that as a kind of entryway to a conversation. Hey, totally appreciate your support on my post. We'll love to hear what particularly resonated about it. Maybe. It all just depends. It all just depends on the person. But, from that recent post, which I'd made, which kind of runs through, if I were a company, seed to series A company, B2B SaaS, here's exactly what my signal-based process would look like. That
Mm-hmm.
tend to land. And then from that post, it generated some conversations, and how those conversations come to play from the folks engaging with the post. That's a clear sign of intent and signal. I take the opportunity to reach out and genuinely see what resonated with them. They share what resonated with them more often than not. And then you kind of pick up conversation from there. And that would be exactly the game plan as to how to drum up real tangible conversation, not based off spam, but based on signal.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. And that was the post that made me reach out to you in the first place as well, of course, right? Lands you on a great podcast. See?
That was the exact post. Yes.
It was. Yeah. So Josh, one more just segue to wrap things up. So as you said at the beginning, you have a lot of hot and spicy takes about things that are happening right now. I'd love for you to share one that might be top of mind for you right now when it comes to LinkedIn content and scaling through founder-led content.
On the spot. Okay.
Mhm.
I'll share
Those are
a
my
few.
favorite kind of questions.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, I spend pretty much most of my time interviewing our clients. And then they always want us to prepare questions and send it to them beforehand. And then to some makes total sense, but honestly, to yield the best conversations and results, they're mostly those ad hoc from the hip questions, putting them on the spot.
Absolutely.
And then I get the pleasure privilege of watching these founders kind of come up with their answers on the spot. So you're doing the same exact thing for me. Makes total sense. I'd say a few things. Number one, as I said over there, the first thing that we like to align on when working with founders is I say, hey, just very straight to the point. What is the initial intent here? Are we looking to become celebrities? Are we looking for likes? Are we looking to optimize for followers? What are your main KPIs? To
Mhm.
which most of them say, Josh, again, to be honest, not here for the clout. I'm just here, because everyone says that LinkedIn is a place to generate business. Pipeline may be drying up, and this is kind of a way to kind of push through the floodgates. Totally valid. On the other hand, we do happen to speak to some founders and executives who say, my goal is to just, I want to drum up my follower count. And, and we even occasionally have the people who say, Josh, why would I work with you who say has 14,000 followers versus someone else who has 400,000 followers? And then my hot take here is at the end of the day, Samantha, if you were to say, Josh, I had a great conversation. I want to collaborate with you on the LinkedIn front, but, my KPI is 100,000 followers, right? If I really want to get someone 100,000 followers, there are those back alley dealers of folks
Mhm.
who sell those services, who sell followers, who sell pods, engagement pods. But at the end of the day, that, as I said, that's a signal that absolutely diminishes trust.
Mhm.
It's very obvious. And at the end of the day, if you're just being engaged by some random people in countries that are not your ICP, by profiles and positions who are not your ICP, you're essentially just diluting your focus. You're diluting
Mhm.
your impressions, your engagements, and that actually causes more harm than good. Number one. Number two, I'm sure I have some spicier things on my mind.
It's there are no shortcuts. That's what I would say in response to what you just said. There are no shortcuts. And every time someone thinks they've come up with a shortcut, there is always an algorithm shift that will take that back down. Google does it all the time, LinkedIn does it. So just don't even try. Just don't even try. Don't
I,
buy the followers. Just do it authentically.
I like to say jokingly, like at the end of the day, we're funny for thinking that we could outsmart 11-figure value platform.
Absolutely.
One of the best technological platforms of all time, if I may, of our time for sure, one of the best, right? And we really think that us geniuses could, just flood our post with 2,000 likes and think that because our post with 20 likes gets 2,000 impressions, a post with 2,000 likes, we get 2 million impressions. Absolutely not. Not happening. If that is, your main Northern Star metric and KPI, then I'm kind of gonna shrug my shoulders and say that, hey, let me introduce you to this person who can accomplish exactly that for a fraction of the price, for a fraction of the impact, because that will absolutely do
Mhm.
nothing for you. Um,
The other
there,
thing,
yeah.
sorry, while you're thinking, I was just going to say the other thing is I when you say you're not here for the clout, I was like, not here for the clout, I'm here for the cash. That's really what I want is that's what I'm gonna do here on LinkedIn. I'm here for the cash.
I saw a funny post. I saw a funny post where it said, and this may be like another hot take, but it's like the reality. It's like uh just someone kind of humorously said, okay, let's cut the crap. Like at the end of the day, everyone's here to sell. Like, that's it.
Right.
I
Yeah.
message you. I, I'm not here to meet someone who I could go for lunch with every Monday. Happens to be that in a professional setting, if I meet someone, we have a great story. We think alike. We do some business together. Yes, we could definitely go for lunch every Monday. In a professional setting. But you know, at the end of the day, everyone's here to sell. Like let's not
Right.
dodge it. But it's just a matter of how to sell responsibly and how to sell correctly. Because if I were to go on and be a walking
Thank you.
billboard, just talk about myself, just talk about my business, just talk about my industry individually, I just sound like a walking billboard, not effective. I become redundant. I become a nuisance to people. They unfollow, not worth following. On the other hand,
Mhm.
presenting from all different perspectives, personal story, business story, industry story, through all that, what that essentially creates is a holistic 360 view, which ultimately, as I said, builds trust, which ultimately is the best way to sell. At the end of the day, let's not dodge it. Let's not beat around the bush. Everyone's here to sell. It's just a matter of how to do so responsibly. That's it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, on that note, I think we can probably wrap this up because I don't know how we would top that one-liner, Josh.
You
That
know
was
what?
great. Thank
It was yeah, it was strong, and I'm gonna kind of end it there. I want to thank you for having me again. It was a great time, great discussing, and if anyone has any questions, my inboxes are always open. As you could tell, as you saw, I'm quite responsive, pretty much 24/7. Email, pretty much wherever you can find my name, you can send me a message, and I'll be sure to answer and help out any way that I can.
Perfect. Thanks, Josh. And I will also link the post that made me reach out to you in the LinkedIn post when I do this as well. And I'll try to put it in the description too for anyone who's watching on YouTube or Spotify, so that you can contact Josh in case you have any questions. But Josh, thank you so much for
Thank you.
sharing your insight with us today. I know there's a lot of founders, especially in that early stage, that are looking to do exactly this. And so sharing your expertise is great. And I appreciate you also sharing how to do it at scale. So that's even better. And I can't tell you how much it's been a fun conversation this morning. So thank you.
Thank you for letting me your platform, and I look forward to providing to anyone who would like as much value as possible.
Thank you for listening to Scale Without Chaos. If you got value from today's episode, do me a favor. Hit that follow button, share the episode with someone scaling a business, or leave a review. It helps more than you know. You can find more content, free resources, and behind-the-scenes takes on LinkedIn and Instagram at Scale Without Chaos. And if you want weekly insights straight to your inbox, head over to balsamandcedar.com and sign up for the newsletter. Keep building. We'll see you next week.